You know, when we think about the epic stories of the Bible, our minds usually jump to the kings, the prophets, the warriors. But hidden inside the story of Queen Esther is one of the most powerful and, honestly, one of the most overlooked models of fatherhood you will ever find. It's a blueprint that's thousands of years old, but you'll see it feels like it could have been written for today. So let me just ask you a question. When you think of the best father figure in the Bible, who pops into your head? Maybe Abraham? David? Or what about Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus? I mean, there are some really solid options, but the answer we're going to dig into today, well, it might just surprise you. Because the answer isn't a famous patriarch or a king, not in the traditional sense anyway. It's actually found in the story of a young Jewish orphan who becomes the queen of Persia. But the real hero of this model isn't the queen herself. It's the quiet, steady man who raised her cousin, Mordecai. And this whole model of fatherhood really starts with a choice, a deliberate decision. Mordecai's role wasn't some kind of accident or an obligation he was forced into. No, this was a conscious, voluntary act. The text is just so clear, so simple. Esther had no father or mother. She was an orphan, living as an exile in a foreign land. And Mordecai, her cousin, took her as his own daughter. Now, in that ancient Near Eastern culture, this was not a given. He chose this. He stepped up when he absolutely didn't have to. And what's so interesting is what that choice actually meant. I mean, this wasn't just about putting a roof over her head. He was taking on the full weight of what it means to be a father, providing for all her needs, protecting her, making sure she was grounded in her Jewish identity, and teaching her wisdom. This was a complete all-in commitment. Okay, and that leads us to a really crucial point about his whole approach. Mordecai's focus was never on her future position, not on her status. It was entirely on her internal character, long before a crown was ever even a remote possibility. And this just shows you exactly what his priority was. Before Esther ever stepped foot in the palace, she knew who she was. She knew her people, her story, her covenant with God. And yeah, later Mordecai advised her to keep her Jewish identity a secret for a while, but he wasn't telling her to abandon it. He was teaching her discernment, not denial. There's a huge difference. Now, once Esther becomes queen, Mordecai's role shifts, and this is where his wisdom just shines. He doesn't try to control her decisions or micromanage her life in the palace. He certainly doesn't use her influence for his own personal gain. The text says he just walked by the palace gate every day simply to find out how she was doing. He was attentive, not intrusive. He was guiding, not controlling. You know, so much of what Esther learned from him probably didn't come from big lectures, but from just watching him. Think about his quiet, steadfast refusal to bow down to that arrogant official Haman. It wasn't some loud public protest. It was a simple act of conscience, of integrity. Esther would have seen that. She learned firsthand that real courage doesn't always need a big audience. Of course, all of this quiet faithfulness was about to face the ultimate test. When Haman's horrific plot to wipe out the Jewish people comes to light, everything Mordecai has ever built into Esther is put on the line. This crisis, this is what reveals the true strength of his fatherhood. And his first move is completely counterintuitive. He doesn't rush in to save her. He doesn't come up with a secret plan to get her out of the palace to safety. He completely refuses to treat her like a helpless child who needs rescuing. And just as important, he doesn't command her. He doesn't pull rank as her father figure and say, "You must go to the king, I'm telling you to." He totally avoids forcing her hand, even with the fate of their entire people hanging in the balance. Instead, he does something way more powerful. He just lays out the stark, brutal truth of the situation. He makes it clear that, deliverance for their people will come from God, with or without her. And then he empowers her with this incredible question. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? He didn't demand action. He called forth the courage he already knew was in her and trusted her to make her own choice. Here's what's so fascinating about all this. Mordecai's actions aren't just some one-off story about a good guy. They actually fit into a much, much larger divine pattern of fatherhood that we see woven throughout the scriptures. When you put Mordecai next to other strong biblical father figures, you start to see the same principles pop up again and again. You see it with Abraham, who releases his son with faith, not fear. You see it with Joseph, Jesus' father, who protects a destiny he knows will far surpass his own. You see it with Moses, who prepares a successor, not just a dependent. They all reflect this same core idea. Fatherhood is about entrusting, not owning. And this is really where it all clicks. Just look at the alignment on this chart. The same pattern: initiating care, protecting without controlling, teaching identity, honoring free will. You see it in the model of God the Father, you see it lived out in Jesus, and you see it on a human scale in the actions of Mordecai. He's a reflection of the divine pattern, showing us what that kind of love actually looks like in practice. So if you boil it all down to one single powerful idea, it's this: the difference between stewardship and ownership. Mordecai understood that he was a steward of Esther's life, not its owner. So let's just run through these core principles one more time. The Mordecai Model. It begins with taking voluntary responsibility. It's about anchoring a child's identity before worrying about their position. It teaches that true authority covers and protects. It doesn't cling and control. It calls forth courage from within, not just demanding compliance from the outside. And its ultimate measure of success? It's preparing a child to be able to stand on their own.
And really, this is the bottom line. Mordecai's goal was never to raise a queen. His goal was to raise a woman of character, of wisdom, of courage. He raised a woman who is capable of becoming a queen when the moment demanded it. Her strength didn't come from the palace, it came from the home she was raised in. So that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. What if this ancient model is right? What if true, lasting authority, whether it's in parenting, in leadership, or just in life, isn't about holding on tighter, but about empowering others and preparing them for release?